in about 2 minutes. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. We had a great event last night with RBC. I opened the event with a terrible joke, so I'm not going to try again. I think my comedy career is over. I have the utmost pleasure and honor of introducing our first keynote, Justine Fedak, Senior Vice President of BMO Brand Sponsorship and Advertisement, and such a remarkable woman. And I'll let her introduce herself and kind of the things, what she's experienced and what she's done with her career. But it's an amazing story, and like I said at the beginning, she was the one who first inspired our whole team from the very beginning 2 years ago when we first started this. And so it's my utmost pleasure. Please give her a round of applause, Justine Fedak.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So for those of you that didn't read the brochure, because I do see that there's disclosure there. I'm assuming everyone knows why I have this cane, right? Pretty much? Raise your hand if you're wondering, why do I have this cane? Okay. Anybody else wondering why I have this cane? Okay, good. So that usually is something that starts out in different places that I speak, that I get up to talk about marketing or something technical to do with sponsorships. And the very first time I had to walk with the cane, I didn't realize how self-conscious I was until I got up in front of a room of people, and I was very comfortable talking about what I do and marketing and branding and BMO. And suddenly I could feel, because you can feel subconsciously if someone's looking at you. And so I could feel everyone looking at me, and all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I was super nervous speaking. And then I had a little bit more sympathy for my husband, who says he's often nervous right before he speaks. So that was maybe a good thing. But all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, I'm going to have to disclose for my own protection and comfort why I have a cane. And so I looked out into the audience and I said, okay, this is the honesty part of my presentation. How many of you, raise your hands, are wondering why I have this cane? And of course, no one's hand went up. 500 people, not one hand. I said, come on now. And sure enough, some people's hands started going up. And at that point I said, well, the reason I have this cane is because I have multiple sclerosis. And I said, I'm not here today to talk about that or talk about that journey, but for those of you that wish to speak about that, I will be available after my presentation to do that. And the minute I told everyone in the room, my cane became very much irrelevant. Now, since that time, what I've learned, that was 2012, is that it's much better for me to put my cane down, take off my shoes, which I have to go to the right side or I won't get the strap off. I have bare feet. I never wear socks because I don't have very much feeling on the bottom of my feet. And so I'm quite unsteady on my feet. So if I don't wear socks, even when it's snowing, even in Montreal on a cold winter day, I don't wear socks, but I don't have that much sensation, so I don't feel cold. And so now I can actually walk around with more sensation and more safety. Now, the first time you see a presenter in bare feet, it's strange. The people from the Royal Bank right now are texting back to the Royal Bank and saying, there is a very strange BMO executive in bare feet talking to our room right now. But I realized that these were things I needed to do to make myself feel more comfortable. And I'll tell you what started to happen after I did this, is that other people that came to present right after me took off their shoes too. And people started kicking off their shoes at conferences, and it became almost a form of solidarity, which did what for me, but made me feel more confident and more comfortable. So what I'd like to do today is have a conversation with you, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey, about what my diagnosis has meant. But this isn't really a presentation about MS per se. It's a presentation about overcoming barriers of fear. And I'm quite open about the fact that I do have certain fears, and I do live with certain paranoias and anxieties, because I think we all do. But I think we do a very good job, even on social media, of trying to portray things in such a way that we almost create a distance between ourselves and the reality of our lives. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is sort of my career journey. So I started off at BMO in 1992, and I started off doing clip sheet work, which those of you that are old enough to remember will remember a time where newspapers used to be cut out, glued on a piece of paper, photocopied, and at BMO they were hand delivered around so people could quickly read all the information they needed to know about financial services. Now that's all done electronically. But that was my first job in the PR department. And so I worked my way up and through marketing and communications, and I was very fortunate to have really good mentors and really great opportunities, and I really fell in love with marketing. But I ended up at my first job by accident. So I was going to University of Toronto actually at the time, and I was just engaged to be married to my high school sweetheart, and 3 weeks after we got engaged, he died in a car crash. So as you can imagine, that was a pretty big shock. And I was on my way to law school. I totally changed my mind about that, and I really didn't have the plan B. But I was very lucky that a friend's father worked for BMO and said, why don't you come and work at BMO in the PR department? And my response to that was, I don't really like banks. I don't think I would like that. Now, 25 years later, I still say, do I really like banks? No. But you know, I was fortunate because I fell in love with marketing, with communications, and also with the culture of a large organization with so many opportunities. And as I started to embrace more and more opportunities and take different roles across the company, but always in marketing communication type forum, I started to realize that I really wanted to advance my career. And I really wanted to do whatever it would take to get to those next levels. And just as I was ready to graduate with my Dalhousie MBA that was supported by a program at BMO, I was away in New York, big weekend with our now CEO actually, who at the time was the vice chairman of wealth management investment banking. And I was with him, and I had all these materials, and I had been planning for all these things I needed to do when the World Economic Forum moved from Davos after 9/11 to New York. And so it was a very unusual time. I had just actually gotten married, and so I was a newlywed, really focused on my career, and all of a sudden I'm in New York, and we're landing in New York, and our current CEO now, who I'm with at the time, says, okay, we have half an hour, go get ready, we have to go to this event, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that my toes, I don't really feel them. And as I go up to my room to get ready and to change into more appropriate attire for the evening, I start to feel that I don't really feel my left foot. Now, for those of you ladies that remember the early days before Spanx, there were Donna Karan support hose. And many of us poured our bodies into them and tried to suck all of our perceived, areas that we didn't want to look the way they looked into these extremely tight pantyhose. And I, of course, thought, these pantyhose are actually constricting my circulation. So I removed them, jumped into a hot bath, only to find out several days later when I was in the hospital that that hot bath, in fact, exacerbated neurologically this attack that I was having for the first time. So by the time the weekend ended, I no longer felt anything on my left side all the way up my back, but only at that point did I confess to him that I thought something may be wrong. And he was very disappointed that I would have concealed this for the entire weekend. I immediately went to the hospital. I was put in a bed, signed a lot of papers, and I was told very quickly, you have one of four things: mass in your brain, a tumor in your spine, lupus, or MS. And my reaction to that was what? I burst out laughing. And of course, now they're very concerned because this is not an appropriate response. And I said, what do you mean? So they reviewed it with me again. And in my mind at that moment, I thought, this is impossible. I've just gotten married. I have this great career. I'm so happy with things in my life. How can this be possible? And accompanying that was, and you may not regain your mobility. We're going to have to do all these things. And it was very alarming. But for some reason, right at that moment, I thought, okay, I can't really take this totally seriously. And maybe that's shock, right? Sometimes we protect ourselves by saying, okay, I'm not going to completely process this. And I'll be honest, I didn't process it for a very long time. And I concealed very much what I was wrestling with, the pain I was in, things I was challenged with. I certainly didn't self-identify as having a disability because I was very worried that people would judge me. And I was very worried that my career would be over. And I really actually felt very different. And I thought, I don't think I can do what I was doing before. I don't think I can do the same work. And actually, yesterday I published my first LinkedIn post. And it's really a bit of a story about these early days. And at the time, because I'm able to tell you the story, at the time, Bill Down, our CEO, came to see me in the hospital. And he's the one that I write about in the article, but he said, I said, I don't think I can do this job anymore. I think I'm going to have to quit. And he looked at me and said, you're exactly the same person. Your work product is exactly the same. You just feel different. You're going to be fine. You're going to get through this. Now, having that conversation made all the difference. And I've had people say, well, yeah, but you already had an established career. But I was not an executive. I was not a senior person. I was absolutely afraid. Who wants to be that poster child for their organization? Who wants to be the one that says, I'd like to test all this corporate mumbo jumbo that my company is telling me is true, all this inclusion, diversity. So when I'm asked by people that I mentor or when I'm speaking in a group, and we'll hopefully have a great conversation today, people say, well, should I disclose? You know what? That is very personal. That is a very personal question that only you can search your heart for. When did I disclose openly to everybody? 2012. And where did it happen? After I had 2 very bad flare-ups, I have not regained my mobility since. There were times before that where I could run and I could do things, but now, I have not regained full use of my leg. So I had to walk with a cane. And it was a Christmas Day game, 2012, Chicago Bulls. I'm based in Chicago, so that's where I live. And my daughter really wanted to go to the game, and she really wanted to get her picture taken center court. And when I walked out center court, I had to walk with my cane. And all these people I had worked with for many years had no idea I had MS. And some of the players came over to talk to me because one of the players' moms is my best friend. And he came over first and he said, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Because he knew. And then the other players during the shoot around started coming over and say, hey, are you okay? What happened? Did you fall? Were you in a car accident? And right in that moment, I said, no, I have multiple sclerosis. And the reaction was, oh my God. And then they were like, well, you seem like you're okay. You're walking. That's great. And all of a sudden I realized, you know what? I'm afraid of the reaction because I don't want to have to explain anything to anyone. But then I realized, how would anyone ever understand something if I don't want to explain it? If I'm spending all this energy concealing something so simple that can be explained with a few sentences, am I really conserving my energy for the good stuff I want to do? So for the rest of that game, as people said, what happened? Why do you have a cane? I realized they were concerned about me, they were interested in me, and I had an opportunity to educate them. And opening up that conversation did something that was unexpected. It helped me. So by me speaking to you today, I'm helping myself, right? Maybe it's really selfish because I'm reinforcing to myself that whatever it is that I'm afraid of is my own invisible barrier of fear, that I have the ability to remove it. So I started to sort of adopt, two life's mottos, and they were like mantras for me. I would repeat them to myself often. So the first one is be in love with your life, every minute of it. Right? And that was Jack Kerouac. For those of you that have read On the Road, if you haven't, look up Jack Kerouac. The second one that's really meaningful for those of you out there that are Bob Marley fans is from Redemption Song. Free yourselves from mental slavery. Only ourselves can free our minds. Now, there's something that I need to disclose to you before we continue, which is that those two gentlemen have one thing in common. They were totally stoned their entire lives, okay? So I have just told you that I live my life based on two people that are completely high most of their lives. So everything I say from this point on, remember that, okay? That's the honesty part of the presentation. But you know what? There was something about those statements that for me became words to live by. Because it's up to me how I want to feel. And as recently as yesterday, I had somebody say they were reading a book called 29 Gifts. And apparently I haven't read it, but it's about somebody who has MS and about how she decided to give someone a gift each day. So I'm going to read the book, but I haven't read it. But what he said is she talked about how she's in horrible chronic pain, how she really suffers this way. And he said, how was I so lucky not to get that? And I said, well, I am in chronic pain. And I do have all those same things. But who wants to hang out with somebody that's in a bad mood all the time? So I learned to meditate. I learned to do certain things. I fell in love with Pilates. My boss, Connie, I said, do you think I could do Pilates? And she said, well, yeah, because you lie down most of the time. She said, what I love about it is it's the only exercise you can just lie down and do. And she has a great sense of humor. And I thought, this is exactly what I need to do. But by talking about this, I opened up a conversation that's helped me, that allowed me to meet Chris, that according to Chris inspired him to gather together a number of you and have this conference. I mean, that 1 minute that I was afraid to be judged, boy, I'm glad now that I don't care if anyone judges me. Because really, you're your own judge. Just like people say, it's up to you how you want to build your career. Absolutely, because it's up to you how you want to build your personal brand. Right? And that's what I do. That's what I get paid to do, is build brands, to build the Brimo brand. And in my case, I look at my own brand and say, that cane is part of who I am. And I'll also make sure that everyone notices that this is a very sexy cane, okay? So when you have a cane like this, you do not need any sort of Tinder, okay? Because people are stopping you all the time. You don't have to swipe left or swipe right. You just go like this. So a lot of my single girlfriends, that are out there looking for a partner, I said, you need this cane. I'll teach you how to look like you need it. But all kidding aside, I turned it into part of who I am. I had to change, some of the style of dress I wear because I couldn't walk in certain shoes, do certain things. But I realized I could control that. I could change my perception of myself and be in love with my life every minute of it. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to open it up for comments, thoughts, questions. I have a lot of very specific type of questions that often I'm asked, and that I'd be curious your answers as well. That would help me when people do ask me. But anybody have something they wish to share? I know there's a microphone right there.
Thank you. I'm not 100% clear on the timeline, but it seems as if there was a while between diagnosis and sort of general disclosure. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how you dealt with flare-ups and having to be absent from work or requiring adjustments during that period before you disclosed.
So I did disclose to my immediate boss and to the sort of few people that I worked closely with, but I absolutely swore them, upon threat of death if they ever told anyone that I had MS. So I did, the people right around me, and like this is the funny thing is that the senior people in our company were aware that I had MS and were very supportive of me, but yet I still didn't trust in wanting people generally to know. And as I look back on that so many years ago, like over a decade ago, it's really because I was not comfortable in integrating that multiple sclerosis was something I had to live with. It had to be a part of me. But I have learned by talking to so many other people, whether it's people suffering from depression or other mental illnesses or things that people don't really understand. And MS is one of those diseases that, I didn't know what it was. When I was diagnosed, I was like, oh, what? Multiple who? I didn't know what it meant. And so often I have to say to people, well, actually, it's a neurological illness that attacks the sheath of myelin over the brain and the spine, and basically the demyelination is the destruction of the myelin, which causes things to kind of be on the fritz in the brain. Periodically, the wrong word comes out of my mouth. My daughter thinks it's hilarious. She's 13. So like the other day, I said, "Pass me my camera," and she said, "What?" And I said, "My camera," and she said, "Mama, that's the phone." And I said, "Well, it has a camera in it. That's what I meant. You knew it." So there are just sometimes things that happen. So I think we all feel that we need to strive for some level of perfection that I felt like I had lost with that diagnosis. So, am I more courageous now? No, I'm just more comfortable internally. And I think what I did is I freed myself from mental slavery. I was unnecessarily suffering. And, I would sometimes see people walking down the street and think, well, do they even appreciate how they're walking? And what's funny is I now have this view of anybody that I see moving in any way or not moving, I'm appreciative of. But I had to switch from what I felt I had lost to what actually I had gained, right? And I think that's what we all strive for. There's moments where we think, you know what, this has like really taught me something. But then there's moments where we somehow are caught up in things from behind, coming behind us, pulling us back. And that's why that Bob Marley quote really stuck out for me. There was a period of time where I must have listened to Redemption Song like 8 million times, like hoping that I would have this, permanent epiphany. But then it stayed with me because I decided I want to be happy. I read this book, and this elderly gentleman in the book said he wanted to be happy for 90 days and see how that would feel. And the funniest part of the book was where he talks about that someone stole his parking spot at the mall, and he felt himself getting really angry. And then he said, oh no, I have to start the clock again, and now he's starting back at day one. So I adopted that as a practice. I'm often asked by people, well, how do you try to stay positive? And I said, well, you try to just be happy. So give yourself the countdown. And then the minute you get really unhappy and have a bad day, then you just start again. So if you're slightly competitive, it bothers you, right? If you're at 20 and then you're at 1, you're like, ugh. So, there were things I had to do like that to remind myself, to be in love with my life every single minute. And then it just started to happen. And now when I have like a bit of a down moment, I talk about it. I talk to my husband about it. I wasn't good at talking about how I felt. I wasn't good at talking about the fears I had associated with things, of anything. So I think that 2012 moment where suddenly I told people why I had a cane, and these were people I knew, I also felt I was dishonest. Like, this was just me personally. I'm not suggesting this for any of you, but I'm saying for me, I started to feel like, am I really being true to myself if I'm concealing something that people ask about? And people ask about my cane all the time, right? So they're like, hey, why do you have a cane? Now, sometimes they ask in a very strange way. So sometimes I'm really cheeky with my answers, but usually I'm not. But every once in a while, I'm cheeky about the answer, not in a mean way, but just in a same way that they're giving me the question. Then I realized, the question is what I want. Because the conversation has to be had, and I'm no longer afraid to have the conversation. Are there times where people may not be included, where a diverse workforce is really not happening? Sure. and whether or not, it's BMO or RBC, and I'm so pleased to see you guys here. And I mean, these are companies that stand by what they say because they value the truth of a diverse workforce, which are the perspectives we're talking about in the room right now. So we're stronger when we talk about things that make us uncomfortable, because then we clear the air, right? And then you can get back down to business. So I think that for me is why this conference, and I congratulate Chris. Oh, there you are. I was like, where are you, Chris? Suddenly he's on the floor. So I can't see him. Like, oh. That's why this kind of conference and all of your attendance here is so important. Because you need to figure out for yourselves, if you are a person living with a disability, how you feel about that. My recommendation is to accept yourself, however you are, right? I mean, whether you're dealing with a chronic illness, dealing with a difficult relationship, just feeling insecure about your future, everybody has these same feelings. So for me, MS slowed me down physically to give me enough time to look at myself, right? And for that, I'm grateful. I could do away with some of the constant burning sensation, but any other thoughts, comments? Is disclosure, yeah? Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm curious, after you disclosed the disability, you've come a long way, and now you're quite a prominent speaker. So at any point were you nervous that this is what you would come to be associated with, as in you would be known as the girl with the MS? So, how did you deal with that?
Somebody said that to me yesterday. Said, your LinkedIn post is getting a lot of attention. Like, people are making a lot of comments, but we don't want, necessarily to put you in a position where you'll be the girl with MS. What's wrong with that? I mean, if the girl with MS is somebody you like and want to talk to, then good. If the girl with MS is somebody you don't want to talk to, then not good. So I do a lot of public speaking, it's true. My first public speaking event started by accident, like everything that's happened to me. I'm like the accidental expert. So I was awarded the Woman on the Move Award in Chicago from the MS Society, gave a thank you speech, and then got a number of calls from other companies asking me to come and tell my MS story. And I said, my MS story? What's my MS story? Because all I did was talk. And then I realized, oh, okay, so they kind of wanted me to talk about my journey. And as a consequence, I got my picture taken a lot at different things, and people would say, oh, put your cane down. And I would say, absolutely not. You can only take my picture with my cane. And I would sometimes go like this, and sometimes go like this, and sometimes go like this. And if it's hockey, because we sponsor a lot of hockey in the US, I would go like this. We don't do golf, really, Josh. We don't have a lot of golf. But I have done mini putt with my cane. So I made it very clear that this, for me, allows me to move quickly when I need to, safely when I'm afraid in a crowd. I think it's really nice looking, too. I mean, I get a lot of compliments on it. A lot of elderly women in their 90s who refuse to use a cane, their children come up to me and say, could you please convince my mother that this cane will not make her look old? And I said, absolutely. I said, so I always tell them, listen, I've got to warn you, a lot of men are going to approach you and be interested in you if you walk with this cane. And of course, that gets a laugh. But I would say I don't mind being the girl with anything. At one time, I was the girl whose mother had been married 6 times. She just got married 2 days ago, it's the 7th time. So I'm now the girl whose mother got married 7 times, twice to my own father, that's true. So I've been the girl that, and that's okay, fill in the blank, right? So the MS is part of me, so I think that's a good question though, because I do think people are afraid to be labeled. I don't know, when you leave, I don't know if that's what you'll remember, that I have MS, or maybe you'll remember something else. But I'm okay with that, because it opens up the conversation. I think that's a good question. Labels are something we don't necessarily want associated to us unless it's Prime Minister, perhaps, President, not always. Any other thoughts, comments? Oh, this way? Okay. Oh, I'm looking for you, but I thought you were over there. I'm getting confused. Here, I guess. Our friends at the Royal Bank of Canada.
Hi. I think it's so awesome that we have a senior leader that is a champion in this space. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, your disclosure, because it seems that you were well into your career and you were very successful. But what would be your advice for people who are maybe in entry level? And disability is obviously not something that you're born with. It's something that can happen in any time, any given time, right? But what would be your, I guess, your advice for people who are in entry level and might have experiences and develop disability in terms of their disclosing in that aspect?
You know, and again, I'm going to give you a perspective, but it's really up to you what you feel comfortable with, right? So I'll use some sort of, colloquial language, like, are you a badass? And if somebody tries to wrestle with you, are you going to state the obvious, which is, hey, if this company's platform is about diversity and inclusion, and you disclose that you have a disability and then you're not hired, and you believe that it has to do with that, then you have to advocate, right? So how do we solve for that so we don't have to ask each other that question? I don't 100% know, but what I do know is that for me, when I did disclose, it was easier for me personally to be comfortable with myself. There are other circumstances where you may not need to, and you may periodically need an accommodation. You may need to work from home. If you need accommodations, I believe that most Canadian companies are willing and able to make those accommodations. Oh, looks like my cane is leaving by itself. Those are things that I think you have to do research to make sure culturally, are you going to join somewhere that will make you feel your best? But that's, you know what, that's for every employee. I've had very good managers. I've worked on boards with people that I absolutely found inspiring, and others that I thought, ooh, this is tough. So you have to decide for yourself where you feel comfortable. Those just joining the workforce, I mean, Chris and I had a lot of conversations, and I've spoken with a lot of college, university graduates, people going through programs, people in high school in their senior year. And I say to them, you have to do what you're comfortable with. I would say that, having a conference like this puts a number of you in very high standing of comfort because you're showing your performance. So one thing that I do often get concerned about is when people say to me, you're so lucky because you work for a company that knows you so well, and so therefore they accept your MS. Well, they don't accept less performance from me, right? I'm still rated the same way as everybody else. I still have performance goals, metrics, a team of people, but there are some days where I say, you know what, Josh, I'm not gonna be able to fly with you to Montreal because I'm just feeling so tired today, or I need to work from home, or sometimes my typing gets really wild and crazy because my eyes get a little bit blurry. And particularly on my iPhone, I'm really terrible. Somebody the other day told me that I type like their grandmother, and I said, thank you. So I can't always see totally clearly, so I make a lot of mistakes because I can't see the screen clearly enough. But I've decided, they can get the general gist of what I'm saying. But sometimes I'll say so. You know what, I'm sorry, but my typing, or I can't write. I can't hold a pen today. My hand is not doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm on my BlackBerry, and I'll say to people, I'm gonna be on my BlackBerry for most of this meeting. I am not texting people. Well, they won't really know, right? So I could be. So that's kind of a fun thing I can do. But I'll say, so please don't be offended. Or if I have to go to the restroom, people with MS have, incontinence can be a problem, fortunately. Too much information, but I'm not incontinent, but that's my greatest fear. It's not being in a wheelchair, not at all. Being incontinent is my personal thing I don't want. So sometimes I have to go to the bathroom a lot. That's annoying for people in a meeting when every 10 minutes I have to keep getting up because they're making a presentation. But I tell them, sorry guys, it's one of those days for me. That's how I've chosen to deal with it. I'm not suggesting you tell people you have to go to the bathroom a lot. It's kind of weird, makes people freaked out. But I'm saying find what makes it easier for you. I think when you're entering into the workforce, ask a lot of questions. An interview is two ways. You're also choosing to work for that company. And if they're lucky enough to have you, then you get in there, and my philosophy is you earn your seat at the table every day. You go in and you earn your seat at the table. And if there are days where you can't take that seat, then figure out a way where you still are making an impact. That could be an accommodation. That might be a different job. There are times where I have preferred a job that didn't require a lot of travel. I'm now on a new treatment that I've got a lot more energy, but there were times where I said, like, I cannot do that kind of travel. So also be honest with yourself about what is going to fulfill you. A job running up and down stairs would not be a good one for me. All right, so I mean, there's things that I just think that you can look at in the environment and say, what is my fit? What's important to me? What makes me happy? The number one thing in your life and your career is be happy. If you're not happy, then you have to figure out how to be happy, because life is short and happiness is your choice, right? As we learned from the 90-day exercise, and you have to start back at 1. It's better to go 91, 92, 93. Other thoughts, comments? I know there were hands that went up. Oh, there's one more at that table. Is there somebody behind? Sorry, this light is sort of, it's a tiny bit blinding on this side, so.
I was just wondering if you could talk about maybe how your experiences have made you a better executive, and if you think, you know, you've gotten any new skills from it, or just how it's improved you in the office, for sure.
Yeah, you know, I would say that as an executive leader, I think what I've learned is that we're all trying to contribute at our best, and there are times where I've probably had to learn how to be less direct and be a better listener, and that listening and slowing things down. A lot of what I've had to deal with health-wise, after I take this treatment, I have to stay in bed for usually about 4 days. I feel pretty rough. It's a new chemo treatment. It's not being done in Canada, but it's kind of like you feel really rough for a few days. And sometimes that's hard because I miss out on what everyone's doing, like family and friends and work. And what's great is I think by expressing that, you know, I'm going to miss some of that, the team, Josh and team and others, do a great job of keeping me included. Sending me pictures, that's something we might be doing, or telling me how an award went that I missed and giving me a chance to congratulate the person. So, you know, I do think that what it's done, it's made me more sensitive to how others are feeling when they're dealing with something, whether it's aging parents, going through a divorce, a child that might have illness. So it's put things in perspective for me, because as I was younger and coming up through the ranks, as I said, at one point I was like, you know, I want this career. I really want this big career. And I think I probably lost sight of the 360 degrees of my life. So I often say now, you know, I don't know how long I can continue to be an executive at a big company. People say, oh, no, you're fine. I said, well, no, but I don't know, because, you know, maybe I'll want to slow things down a little for myself. But I'm open about that I have these questions. So I do think as an executive, it's put things in perspective for me. As you can tell, I mean, if you're walking around in bare feet, you're not too uptight. So it's certainly loosened me up. And this is how I dress pretty much all the time, in very non-bank-like executive clothing, but that is also just who I am. So the more comfortable I became with everything about myself, then the easier it was, I think, to be a more effective leader. You can probably talk to Josh after about all the stuff that I do really badly, and he can tell you that they're working on me. I'm still a work in progress.
Thanks for sharing your story. It's very inspiring with great humor. So you mentioned about meditation. Can you share a little bit about how meditation has helped you in your journey? Because I know meditation is a proven method, not for everybody's mental well-being, but especially for people who go through some struggles in life. And a lot of people I talk to, and they feel scared about meditation because they just ask, well, so what do you do? Just sit down and think nothing? And how does it help you? So can you share a little bit about your meditation experience and how it has helped you in your journey?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is there's different types of meditation. For those people that have never done any kind of meditation, you often imagine a gentleman with a long white beard on the top of a mountain. This is also one type of meditation. But a lot of corporations are incorporating that. I know Google also is hugely involved with offering meditation for folks at work. And really, it, for me, became a pain management, just to be able to slow down and focus on relaxing myself so that I wasn't adding more stress. So, I learned, though, as a child. My mother had some very interesting friends. And so I learned meditation as a child, so it was easy for me to incorporate it. I've taught my daughter. But it really is as simple as being somewhat still and just also focusing on your body. And it was important for me to be able to feel the different sensations going on. So again, my style was to try to integrate how I felt. And so all meditation did was sort of isolated for me how I was feeling, which is probably also why I like Pilates and different things where you actually feel different sensations. And so I think that for me became a stress management tool. I still find it very helpful. And particularly, stress makes all of us more anxious, and stress makes you not as well as you can be. So whether you're wrestling with, a cold, if you add stress to your cold, you feel worse. Being happy also makes you feel better, even when you don't feel well. So even when I have, chemo shooting through my veins in the hospital, I find that, watching news programming with some alarming things is not usually the best stuff because it makes you anxious. So for me, meditation was that stress management way of just slowing down my thoughts. I don't know about my thoughts becoming blank. I know people talk about that, but it was really just a matter of, true relaxation. But there are lots of stress management techniques. That was one that worked for me. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Chris is giving me a small signal somewhere. Oh, there. This is for some reason, it's this direction here that.
Based on your role of having an executive position and the path that you've gone, how do you think you've influenced engaging your organization in accepting diversity and improving it even further?
Well, you know what? I'm not going to say that I'm going to take a lot of credit. What I would say is we have some great people that work very hard. We have employee resource groups that are really empowered. We have one group called BMO Without Barriers, and in the US, I'm the executive sponsor. What I've probably personally done is just been a voice, and a very open voice, and in some cases, that's encouraged more people to talk openly, and I think that conversation is what I'm most proud of, is whatever small contribution I've made to that by speaking externally, speaking within the walls of BMO, but also just encouraging people. I'm very lucky because I have had a wonderful environment, and where perhaps people have misunderstood disability, we've had the opportunity to open up that conversation. So, I think I've just been a constant advocate. The LinkedIn post was something that was important to me to do, and as an executive, I have to, be sure that the company I work for, which is BMO, is comfortable, and they were like, absolutely, we want you to publish that. So, I think that I've had good support, and so I've returned that by trying to do the best I can with having a voice. But there are so many, and I mean, all of you in this room will leave today and talk to someone else about what you did and how you spent your day. And those conversations will lead to other conversations. And the number of people that have disclosed to me things they're dealing with is countless. And the more I hear things, the more I think, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm so inspired by what people manage. So I think that's what I've also, maybe to the question about better executive, you know what? I am one tiny story in a sea of millions of stories. And I think that's the thing, is the telling of the stories is what I've probably done at BMO. And then other people are telling their stories. We have a new ad right now for our bicentennial. So BMO is the oldest bank. It's Canada's first bank. And we have this TV ad that I'm extremely proud of, that our ad team, we worked on together with our agency. And we have a bicentennial fountain. It'll be coming to Montreal soon. But if you go to bmo200.com, you can make a wish. And what BMO's doing for its 200th anniversary is giving back. And there are basically 11 categories that you can make a wish. And we select one wish across Canada and the US each month and make that wish come true. Now, a lot of people say, well, I wish my mortgage was paid off. It's not that kind of wish. We all wish our mortgage was paid off, me too. But it's the kind of wish for someone else. So it's wishing it forward. And what's really beautiful about this ad is it's a wife wishing that her husband could fly. And what was fantastic is we worked so closely with our BMO Without Barriers group to ensure that we got a lot of perspectives, because what we wanted to do was have a disabled person be part of the story. It's something obviously I'm very passionate about, that we very visibly, openly show disability, so people feel comfortable that everyone's the same. And so the wish was for her husband to fly. And we all talked about how we all, as kids in different times, have wished to fly. So it's not a wish unique to a person that doesn't necessarily have their mobility. It's a wish we all sometimes have, right? And so we have this beautiful ad that it hopefully will inspire lots of people to make their wish that can possibly come true in the celebration. But I was particularly proud of that because the team said we'd really love to have, some aspect of a person with a disability. So we've been trying to integrate different stories, and what's great about it is our employees see themselves, just like we do with every ad. We try to cover diversity, like the places that we work and live, the people that work and live with us. And so we all really just fell in love with this ad, and the actor is an Olympian. And I mean, this guy was so strong. Like, he had to be put in this, special equipment to do this. And we were all like, there's just no way any of us could have done it. I mean, no matter, just the strength. And I think that is what I'm proud of, is when we recognize strength in one another and see past maybe something that might be a blind spot. So that ad is something we're proud of. So go to bmo200.com and make your wish. Or you can wait. The fountain is coming in the summer here to Montreal, our birthplace. The Bank of Montreal, in case you were wondering. All right, well, Chris is saying we are at time. I want to thank everybody so much, both for your attendance here. I want to thank Chris and your committee. You guys have done a fabulous job. I couldn't be more proud or delighted to be invited to share my story with you today. And I'm now on Twitter. I'm really terrible on Twitter. So if anyone would like to tweet at me, I will do my best to tweet back at you. I need the practice. It's Justine Fedak, MS. So for your question, am I worried about being the girl with MS? I guess not, because I put it in my Twitter handle. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justine. Just from our whole committee, we want to say thank you for that great keynote. You're welcome to come back anytime. So thank you very much. Let's give her another round of applause. So I know it's been a long day, so we're actually going to move right into the next panel. That way you guys can eat sooner. I think you guys would all agree that's probably a good idea. So the next panel is the Driving Innovation, the Impact of Diversity panel. And I'm actually going to introduce our moderator, Seema Burney of Burney Consulting. Give her a round of applause, please.
I'm just going to invite our three panelists to come up. Just have a seat and we'll introduce you. Hello. And Deanna, is she here? Is Deanna here? Deanna's the other one. Oh, she's coming. Perfect. There's Deanna. Hi, that's me. Hi. So we'll leave like 10 minutes at the end.
Yeah,
perfect.
Do you want me to give you a 15 minutes?
Sure. Yeah. Is everyone comfortable? Get you guys set up. Perfect. Great. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Seema Burney, and I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant, and also a proud graduate from the Faculty of Management at McGill University. It's my pleasure to be here today to animate this panel discussion called Driving Innovation, the Impact of Diversity. And I'd like to just quickly, before we get started, just introduce our panelists, although I'm going to give them a bit of time to tell us about their own background. But we have Daniela Ludlich, Advisor in Talent Acquisition from National Bank. We have Gordon Frost, Partner, Country Leader, Mercer Canada Career Business. And Diana Madzanke, Senior Director, Measurement and Analytics at the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. So before we get started and jumping into our questions, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just introduce themselves and give us a little bit about their background. And so I think we have a microphone there. We can pass it around. Now let's start with Daniela.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniela Lulik. I work at the National Bank. I've been with the National Bank for almost a year now. Prior to that, 20 years in aerospace, Bombardier Aerospace, also in talent acquisition. I studied at McGill and obtained my degree at HSC. Very happy to be here. Your presentations have inspired me. I'm very passionate about diversity. I feel it's very, very important. And I'm very proud to be at the bank because I feel as well that we really, diversity is part of our organizational culture, and I'm excited to talk to you about that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Great. So my name is Gord Frost. I work at Mercer, which is a global HR consulting firm, and I lead one of our lines of business here in Canada, which does include broad talent management, human capital strategy. Diversity and inclusion is part of that, and something that we work with our clients on extensively. I would also say that it's something that's becoming increasingly important. So not just for people with disabilities, but all types of diversity, and how, as organizations, we can both value that more and actually leverage that to create success for our organizations, success for our employees, and success for our communities. So I'm also a McGill graduate. I'm very pleased to be here today and look forward to our discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm Deanna Madzanke. I'm currently with the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. I manage our measurement and analytics team there. I don't have a numbers background, but somehow I got into that. Good to see the banks here. I was formerly the head of diversity at Scotiabank for 7 or 8 years. And I'm a McGill graduate as well. I have my national program law degree from the law school here. And the honesty part of this presentation is I live with 3 disabilities, actually, none of which you can see. So what Justine was talking about is very relevant for me and informs a great deal of my experience. And I take that experience now. I have the opportunity to work with all sorts of companies. So where I had a very good experience working with one company doing this kind of work, I now get to do that with a lot of different companies, and it's served me well in that respect.
Great, thank you. I'll let you keep the mic because I'll ask you the first question. So from a company's perspective, what do you see are some of the financial benefits regarding diversity in organizations? So I guess we're back into that old discussion of some of the business case. But Deanna, maybe you could just start us off by saying what are some of the advantages that you've seen financially for organizations that embrace diversity?
Well, funnily enough, I came in from Vancouver last night. It was very late. And I was working with a company there who was focusing on what I call the ROI of D&I, so return on investment for a focus and investment in diversity and inclusion and a strategy. And for every company, it's different. So what matters is to find what are those business outcomes that matter for that organization, and then to look at what internal metrics they have that you can look at the impact of those on the actual business. And the great thing about the recent research in diversity and inclusion is that there's some pretty good correlation between a focus on diversity and inclusion, how it impacts employee engagement, and how that positively affects business outcomes. So just to give you an example of some of the outcomes that are being considered, and I've actually worked with companies doing this, is for this company in particular, safety is a very big issue. And their business outcome that they want to impact is their net asset value. So they're looking at how does a focus on diversity and inclusion increase their engagement, which ideally should decrease their safety incidents, that impacts your operating costs, and that impacts your net asset value. They're also looking at the impact of absenteeism. Same kind of formula, less absenteeism impacts your operating costs, impacts your net asset value. For another company that we did some similar work with, they were looking at, this was a retail organization, they were looking at shrinkage. So shrinkage is loss from theft, breakage, or just goes missing somehow. And we know that highly engaged employees pay more attention to those things, and your shrinkage goes down, impacts your operating cost, impacts your net revenue. Those are the kinds of things that a CEO is held accountable for. So if you can prove or show the line between a focus and an investment in diversity and inclusion and a business outcome, then it becomes a business imperative. It's not just that thing that lives and dies in HR, which it often does.
Great. Gordon, do you want to add anything to that, or Daniela, about the return on investment? Have you been looking at that at Mercer?
Sure. So one of the things that I would talk about, and ROI is sometimes hard to calculate because it is hard to get the specific financial metrics and tie them directly. But I think the thing that a lot of organizations have bought into today is the importance of, especially in our economy today, in a knowledge-based economy, there really is a war for talent, right? And having the most highly skilled employees and the best talent within your organization and being a magnet for talent is a strategic imperative. It's a competitive, it's a point of competitive differentiation for organizations. And so if you look at, Canada today and North America and our societies and our organizations and our communities, we're becoming more and more diverse. It's just a function of what the future will hold for us. And so organizations, see it as an imperative that if they have a more diverse workforce, they're going to have a workforce that's more creative, that can drive better innovation, that can drive customer solutions that are more representative of the entire diversity of their customer base when their organization reflects what that customer base is. And so, it's almost like you don't need to prove that financially, because it's just so fundamentally true that organizations can't help but recognize it. So that's what I would say is the business case, I think, is quite well accepted. How to get there is what some organizations still struggle with. And so what we take, and I'd love to hear more from you about this is fantastic, is we really do take a business analytics approach to it, to say, if this is what you're advocating for your organization, and these are the objectives that you want to have, then can we use analytics around, workforce analytics and other types of analytics to say, are you actually successfully implementing these objectives within your organization? Do you have different barriers that need to be overcome? You know, are there, earlier in the day we talked about unconscious bias or those types of things? Are there different types of programs that you could adopt or solutions that you should be implementing to ensure that you actually are promoting and achieving the type of diverse workforce that you might be, you know, saying that you want to have?
Great. Gordon, you brought up a great point about the war for talent. So my next question for Danielle, and I think it's appropriate since you've been working in talent acquisition for so long. How do you see that as the war for talent when you were at Bombardier and now National Bank, you know, trying to find that diverse talent? And maybe you could talk a little bit about people with disabilities and how you go about really tapping into that network and attracting people with disabilities to apply to roles.
Well, at the National Bank, we have many initiatives in place to attract various people from diverse backgrounds. And for people with disabilities, what we have in place is we already have a pre-qualified pool of candidates. And when we do have positions that are available, well, we tap into that pool and we call the candidates to encourage them to apply. We are always looking at diversity. As a bank, the objective is to grow the business, to obtain customers, to make money. So what we do is when we are in a region and we're looking at that region, well, who are our customers? So it's very important that the bank has a workforce that reflects that customer base. And all our 95% of our branches are accessible to people with reduced mobility. So we're working very, very hard at attracting people from different diverse backgrounds and with limited movement disabilities.
Great. Thank you. Now, we talk a lot about innovation and how diversity can bring innovation. Maybe, Gordon, you can start by answering this. Have you seen examples of innovation really being at the center of organizations because of diversity? How have you seen the impact of diversity on innovation?
Sure. So, I think there's a lot of different examples that you can talk about of how having a more diverse group of employees can actually drive innovation in different ways. And one of the examples, although this wasn't a personal one that I had, that I liked the best and I think it's relevant to this group because it was actually around people with disabilities. And the argument that they made was that especially people who have physical disabilities often are much harder on the products that they purchase, or because of their difficulties with mobility, have different needs of the products that they purchase. And so as a result of that, they're able to come up with solutions of how to improve those products and make them more durable, more resilient, more functional, more adaptable, that an able-bodied person or a fully able-bodied person would not have thought of. And so I think that's one really great example of how, unless you had had those experiences on the team, those innovations would not have been proposed, right, and incorporated. And so, to me, again, you just ensuring that you've got that, you never know when somebody's experience or when somebody's, personal circumstances will drive that next innovation. So ensuring that you've got that diversity within your teams to begin with and throughout your organization is absolutely essential, because you can't say, oh, for this product, we need a person who has reduced mobility, right? You don't know, right? You just have to have that within the culture of your organization and ensure that it permeates all of it.
Great. Deanna, do you have anything to add to that in your experience at Scotiabank or perhaps with the CCDI? Have you seen cases where innovation is really improved because of a diverse group of people?
I don't know that there's a specific example I can come up with. I'm often I drop in and I act like a personal trainer, and then I leave, and they still have to do the work. So I encourage them to tell me when things go well. I probably have more examples of barriers coming down. But from an innovation perspective, I think it's really important to understand that no matter how much you know, you don't know what you don't know. And inviting different perspective into the development of any complicated process or product or service is a way of expanding the possible solutions. So if you're only looking for the best solution, that's pretty narrow. If you're looking for all possible solutions, and then you choose the ones that are most relevant to the people who are going to use it, that's what innovation is. So it's not necessarily an end product, it's a process. And a process that has multiple perspectives is going to give you something that's going to be more relevant to more people, which means it's inclusive. So diversity is the source of creativity. Creativity is the source of innovation. So if you have very little diversity, your creative power sucks, and you're not going to come up with the kind of innovative, move-ahead ideas that could mean the competitive difference for your organization. One of the exercises I do with, I do unconscious bias training as well, is an exercise to simulate what happens when you do things mindlessly and you're not really paying attention to what's going on in front of you. And the output of that exercise is a question, a specific question that I generally find you have to have about 20 people in the room for somebody to know the answer. And my point in doing that is, if you don't have enough diversity and that one answer is the thing that's going to make a big difference to your company, either in terms of competitiveness or risk management, and you don't have it, well, you're dead in the water already. Talk about sustainability has gone out the door. That particular piece of information is critical, and it comes from having enough diverse perspectives around the table from the beginning of the process to the end.
Great. And Daniela, did you want to add anything in terms of innovation, what you've seen either at Bombardier or National Bank about diverse teams coming out with more innovation and exciting ideas?
Yeah, well, we had at Bombardier a workstation that needed to be modified for a certain person that was not able to sit for very long periods of time. And that was a little bit of a challenge, and we all came together. The team that was putting this together came together and included the person that had this disability as well to input information to make the workspace ergonomic and comfortable for them, and that was very successful.
Okay, good. And so there was good integration of perfect. Now, in terms of personal experiences, I'll stay with you, Daniela. You know, you said you have a passion for diversity. Is there anything in particular that's motivated you to become an advocate for change, for, you know, to be at these panels and to really share your passion for diversity?
Well, I have a very close personal friend whose son has a syndrome. It's Tourette's syndrome. And this person, he's wonderful. He's obtained his master's degree. He has a job. He's very steady, but he's also someone who in certain social situations becomes very, very anxious. So through coaching, he's come to me often because he was basically working at IGA as the person who bags your groceries, and he has a master's degree. So he wanted to obtain a job at a bank, and we discussed it. I coached him, and he's so driven, and he has got wonderful evaluations from his employer, and he was able to obtain a job as an underwriter in Toronto. And this is the first time that he's on his own away from home. And he's just a wonderful employee, and he's really being appreciated where he's working. So for me, if I can help one person, for me, that's excellent. And I think that also, I had certain biases in the past as well, and I used to discuss with my friend and wonder, what kind of a job is he going to be able to obtain if he's not comfortable in the social setting? But he nailed it, and he's very successful. So for me, that was that helped remove some of the biases that I had as well.
Great. And Gordon, yourself, any personal experiences that you'd like to share that have sort of driven or helped to emphasize this passion for diversity?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll come at it from a little bit of a different angle in that I don't necessarily have extremely relevant personal, experiences. Not that I don't, know people who have different disabilities and challenges and all those sorts of things. But I think what makes me most passionate about it, interestingly, is I come at it from a business perspective, right? So, I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree from McGill, I have an MBA, I'm a pretty hardcore, capitalist, with some possible limits, but I believe in, I'm passionate about helping Canadian organizations be successful on the world stage, right? I think, I'm very proud of, where I'm from, and I believe that, Canadian companies can compete with the best in the world, and I want to help them to do that. And my personal area of real interest is around how do you leverage talent and people to create success. And so I go back to what I said before, I fundamentally believe that the organization that can leverage their people in the best possible way, can align people around common interests, can motivate people to achieve common goals, and can leverage the diversity that we have within Canada today. I feel that that's such an incredible strength of our country and of our society. And so to me, that ability to really live up to organizations' commitments around diversity, not because it's the socially nice thing to do, although it is, and it's the right thing to do for people because we care about them, we do. But I like to take the angle of people who just care about money at the end of the day, care about profit. It's profitable also, right? You can be more successful by successfully living up to a commitment around diversity and backing that up with hard data and facts. That's
Deanna, you're smiling because you're in charge of analytics, so you're smiling about the return on investment.
That's where I've migrated to. And, the perspective that why you wouldn't look at leveraging the biggest asset you have, which are your people, because you don't have a business without your people. And they're your biggest risk, which means you have to manage the risk. Why you wouldn't focus on that with as much effort and passion, I'm mystified sometimes, but often it's drawing the direct line to the business benefit of that. But I've arrived at that through a couple of different ways. I have a social justice background, and social justice as an outcome is always the right thing to do, but boy, there are different ways of getting there. So I have that background. I was in international human rights, worked in Africa and the Caribbean. But I also, what informs my passion has really been mostly on the disability side. So I had a very intense episode of depression in 2007 and discovered that I've been living with that since I was about 8. And it's significantly impacted the depth of my understanding about the mental well-being and comfortableness of individuals in a workplace, and how your brain actually, when you're in pain, even social pain, it lights up the same receptors in your brain. So if people are distracted by pain, they're not focusing on their work. That's a fundamental passion for me, that the distraction of social pain is so great for some people that they get ill because of it. They won't work for certain companies because of it. That has a business outcome. That has a significant business outcome. So that's that issue. I also live with arthritis. So even when I started at the bank, which is, as inclusive as they try to be, even pushing open the big heavy glass doors. So I had a conversation with someone after about that. And I also have a hearing processing issue. So there are times where I'm struggling to understand what's going on. And those 3 aspects inform a huge amount of what I do and how I see both the people that work for me, the people I work with, and organizations and how they function generally.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So you've all had the opportunity, well, many of you have opportunities to work with organizations that believe in diversity and put an emphasis on that. But what would be your advice to an individual who is working for an organization or who wants to work for an organization where maybe there's no policy, maybe there's no emphasis on diversity and inclusion, especially for people with disabilities. How can you advocate for that within a company? What would you suggest if you're in a company where it's not really something that's spoken about, it's not in the limelight? What would you tell an individual in that situation? I could start with you, Tiana, go ahead.
Really depends how big your organization is, I think, in some respects. For really large organizations, generally somebody's already down that road, so it would be, actually maybe it applies for both large and small. Find other people like you. So start talking about it. Start talking about what matters to you, what you've heard maybe here. I guarantee you somebody else thinks the same. And as you find those people, you develop sort of a core of thinking that you can then formulate some kind of or advocate to either a business unit leader or HR, or maybe you just have a lunch and learn and say, you know, I'm interested in this topic. Anybody want to come and talk about it? It's exposing the topic to the light of day, so to speak. Conversation breeds more conversation, and as that conversation proceeds, people start to think and go, I wonder what another company is doing about this. And then that's where you can come into and find out what other companies like yours are doing that you could use as an example.
Great. Gordon, Daniela, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is maybe from a little bit of a different perspective, and somebody mentioned this a little bit this morning in the prior panel, but the fact that often people who have, you know, a disability of one kind or another have had to learn to overcome that, or have to learn to deal with that, you know, in a day-to-day basis and function in different ways. And so even though they may have, you know, certain parts of certain areas where they are, relatively speaking, disabled, they've developed other skills that allow them to compensate, which there actually are strengths for them. And so I like the idea of people focusing on those strengths, articulating what those are. It might be a special resilience that someone might have. In this morning's panel, they gave the example of someone who was deaf saying, well, I have wonderful visual acuity, right, which gives me an exceptional ability to do a number of other things, even though I can't hear. You know, so rather than focusing on the things that people can't do, maybe focus on the things that they've developed that may be unique or different, and allow them to contribute in a very positive way to the organization. And so even I think in smaller organizations that may not have big programs around diversity and inclusion, or have a lot of people that may look like you if you've got, you know, if you're a smaller employer, I think people still have something to contribute, and if you focus on, here's what I can contribute to the business, here's how I can, you know, impact our clients, our colleagues in a positive way, to me that's very compelling.
Great. Daniela, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important to talk about it, and if you are in an organization where perhaps it doesn't exist, is go out, get your facts, benchmark, and then, like we said earlier, the bottom line is to prove with numbers that it will help your business grow. And if you're not happy in the organization and they're not inclusive, then you need to find where you're going to be happy.
There's obviously a lot of employers in the room who will be happy to accommodate great talent. At this point, I'm going to actually open the floor up to questions. So if anybody has any questions, I think we have one over here.
Thank you so much for the discussion. It was really insightful. So my question is, I'm particularly interested to know whether any of your organizations have implemented or are in the process of implementing specific initiatives or programs that have been created, or have promoted more inclusive and diverse environments for your clients and the customers, because I think a lot of our focus today has been more or less from the perspective of our employees and the recruiters, but I just wanted to know whether or not you have implemented any programs for your clients specifically.
Programs for our customers, like customers to the bank. Well, when we look at our branches, we will look at, where are we setting up our branch. So, example, if I have a branch in Little Italy near the Jean Talon area, I will include an employee who perhaps speaks Italian because they'll be able to reach out to the Italian community. There's still some older folks who are very comfortable coming in and meeting someone at our branch. So these are the types of things that we will do so that the customer feels that when they walk into the branch, either there's wheelchair accessibility, there's someone that speaks their language that can make them comfortable. These are the types of initiatives that we have at the bank, at the National Bank.
Yeah, so given that I work for a consulting firm, most of the work we do is actually helping our clients to implement these types of programs. So, one of the things that I'll talk about is earlier we talked about the use of analytics. And I think that's a really good way of understanding, what type of workforce do you have today? And how is that workforce, are you successfully attracting, retaining, promoting, advancing, people of diversity, of diverse groups through your organization? Now, certainly, that's actually harder to do in Canada because organizations don't track data around different types of diversity other than really gender. We don't track racial ethnicity, we don't track a number of different things, whereas in the US, they do, right? So when we work with a US-based organization, we've got much, much more data that we can use to look at how diverse populations, work through organizations, and are they being promoted at the same rate? Are they, taking different jobs in equal proportion? Are they well represented at executive levels and things like that? In Canada, you need to take more. It's harder to use actual workforce data on that, but you can still take anecdotal information to see how well the organization is doing. So, absolutely, we work with a number of clients in ensuring that their policies are actually being successfully implemented within their organizations.
Good. Daniela? Sorry, not Daniela, Deanna.
Yeah, we focus on workplaces and schools, but one of the clients I have, again, retail organization, and I don't think they've quite expanded it as far as they possibly could, but taking the advice of their frontline employees, the store design people have actually integrated some different perspectives in terms of ability to move through the retail space in a way that's helpful. So they've invited women in with or parents in with kids and the really large cart that they put that has the extra chair in it. Well, it was pretty enlightening to see how unmaneuverable that was in the context of the aisle width and things like that. They've also invited people in different sizes of wheelchairs. I think they need to go the next step. So for people like Justine, who are unsteady, may have trouble reaching up high or bending down low. So they're certainly getting the idea, but what I find is there's often more attention to customer side than there is to employee side. So I know at Scotiabank, they were really great at laying out the front part of the bank, but the back part, had the printer way up high that most people, under 5'6" can't reach. Let alone somebody who might be in a wheelchair, and the wickets and the way the employee space was set out was highly not inclusive. So I find there's actually more attention in general on your customer base than there is on your people base, and your people base are the ones serving your customers. So that's part of the reason we focus on what we do. But it's customers drive revenue too. So that's why there tends to be more focus on that.
Perfect. Another question? Do we have another question over here? The young man over at the end.
Hi, thanks for coming, first of all. But this is a question primarily directed for Mr. Frost for the consulting firm. Do you find that since you started in like 2000, that the culture for companies looking for diversity management has grown exponentially? Do you find yourself still having to give compelling pitches and trying to convince companies that diversity management is the way to go? Or do you find that our companies are starting to come to you and look for diversity?
Yeah, so certainly, since 2000, it's evolved tremendously, I would say. And I don't know if you guys would concur, but nobody was really talking about diversity and inclusion, 15 years ago. Nobody had, an SVP of diversity and inclusion, or a VP diversity, or a diversity function or diversity team within their organizations. And I would say most, at least large organizations do today, right? Now the teams are bigger and smaller and all that sort of thing, but it absolutely has evolved tremendously, in my career, without question. What I would say, though, is that I think the next frontier is that I don't think you'll find a senior executive today that will tell you that diversity and inclusion is not important to them. Like, they all buy in and they all say the good stuff, and whether they're saying it because they mean it or they say it because they want to look good, I'm not sure, but they'll all tell you that it's critically important to their organizations and it's strategic and blah, blah, blah. But then when you scratch the surface and say, okay, well, what are you actually doing about it, right? And not just what programs, and we're doing, even they'll say, oh, well, we do inclusiveness training. Great. What impact is it having? And that's where I get back, I know I've harped on analytics a lot, but show me the data that's showing me that what you're saying is actually supported by what you're doing, right? And the impact that it's having. And that's where I think we still have a lot of work to do. Some organizations, and we've heard from, BMO earlier, and I think some have done really exemplary work about it, but I think a lot of organizations have not yet, and so that's what I like to advocate, is especially for smaller and mid-sized organizations, and in Canada we've got a lot of those, they're really not sure what to do, or what tools that they can employ to get there, and so, to me, I'm passionate about how we can help them, and what tools we can give them to help them achieve that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. When you scratch under the surface, sometimes there's a lot of depth to what people are talking about.
Ask them what budget they have.
Okay. Well, this is often a question I ask is, okay, if this is such a strategic imperative for you, tell me what other business strategy or priority has no people allocated to it, no budget, and no time. Well, then it ain't a priority. So that's often where I come in to go, okay, this is what an actual strategy looks like, and this is what walking the talk actually means. I have to do that regularly. And believe it or not, there are big organizations that I just had one contact us who hasn't done a thing in the diversity and inclusion area, and they are starting from scratch. Absolutely from scratch. And they're in an industry where it's highly developed as well. So it's the fight goes on, which is why CCDI exists. All of us come from corporate backgrounds where we were the only person in the organization doing what we're doing. We had to fight for budget, we had to fight for time, we had to fight for visibility. And that continues to be the case. So there may be, the words are out there, but the walking it and allocating it the same amount of resources you would to any business strategy is still a big, big hurdle, period.
I'd like to say at the National Bank, we have a whole intranet site dedicated to diversity. We have networking and mentorship programs for women who wish to move up the corporate ladder. We have put in place a pool of pre-qualified candidates with disabilities. So the way this process works is we don't know when an applicant applies if they have a disability or not. So we ask the applicant, again, unlike the States, I think, where it's mandatory. Here, it's optional. So you will auto-identify yourself as someone with a disability, and the recruitment team looks at those candidates, pre-qualifies them, and when we have positions available, we will call the candidates up and talk about opportunities and their interests. We do a lot of volunteering as well in different organizations. So I think we're getting there. I think when senior management is involved as well, and they have a whole team that's involved in diversity inclusion. And we have programs where we ask the employees to take this training, and we sensitize the recruiters. I think it's a big step to what it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago in the industry.
Okay. I think we have time for one more quick question, because otherwise Chris is giving me the signal. And do you have one more question? Anybody? No? Ah, one in the back over there.
Hi, I'm just wondering, how do you go about recruiting people with disabilities? And within each disability, whether it be physical or mental, what kind of metrics do you use to assess the value that a potential individual can add to your company?
Well, what we'll do is when you apply, if you were to apply at the National Bank, there's some pre-screening questions that we ask you to answer. And one of them is, are you a person with a disability? And then when we call you for the telephone interview, we will see that in the pre-screening questions you've auto-identified yourself this way. Then we'll ask you, what is the reasonable accommodation that you need? Sometimes it could be the simplest thing, as I said earlier, perhaps someone who cannot sit for long periods of time. So how can we adjust the workstation? Or someone who has chronic tendinitis, how do we set it up ergonomically for this individual?
Okay.
The thing that I might actually focus on is, we think a lot about diversity broadly in the pool of talent that we bring into the organization, right? And we want to have a diverse group of candidates that we're making offers to. And then we'll measure that afterwards. We'll say, well, who did you hire? Like, let's look, right? And then we'll look and we'll say, like, why did you hire all white men, right? Like, you're like, wait a minute, this isn't diverse. Yeah. And so we'll test it, but part of the problem is actually, are we actually attracting those candidates to apply in the first place? So you almost have to think about, if the process that you've gone through in the past is to always go to the same pools of talent or recruit in the same places or recruit in the same ways, do you need to actually fundamentally change that to ensure that you're attracting the diversity that you want in the first place? Because if you're only picking from a limited pool, then you're never going to achieve those objectives. So that's what we challenge ourselves to do, is to say, are we, actually creating opportunities and going out and encouraging, applicants from across the spectrum of applicants, and not just going to, the same schools where you're going to get the same candidates over and over again.
It's a cost-benefit analysis in the end, and I'm going to steal from Mark, who's your next keynote, because he's got the business case down for this in a dozen different ways. It matters what business outcome is important to your organization. So for Mark, retail organization where turnover is extremely high, he's able to show that his turnover is significantly less than comparable organizations. And that turnover is about equal to, for entry-level organizations, the cost of turnover is equal to their salary generally. So for Mark to have reduced his turnover as significantly as he has through a diversity strategy, hiring people with disabilities, that has an enormous impact on profitability, enormous. So it happens to be disability, but that applies to, diversity broadly. It doesn't matter what the diverse element is or the diversity dimension is. It matters that you're getting different perspectives into the workplace, and that is having an impact on your business outcomes that matter to you. So for a public sector organization, revenue isn't what they're concerned about. They're concerned about their social license, they're concerned about their community, they're concerned about operating costs or but staying within their budget. Those are the things that are going to matter to your senior most person. So measuring the appropriate thing, that's why I have a measurement and analytics team. You got to measure the right thing in order to get useful data. Measuring for measuring's sake is useless time, or a waste of time. So it's drawing those lines in a way that your organization will recognize and will see as valuable as a way of sustaining the business or the organization over time.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniela, Deanna, Gordon. I think we all learned a lot about organizations, what some of them are doing to drive innovation, and a lot about metrics, so that's great to see that. I mean, a lot of business students here, so I think that's of interest to all of you. So thank you very much for participating. Let's give a round of applause. And I believe we'll be heading into lunch. Maybe Chris is going to come up and tell you guys where to go, but thank you.
All right, so that was the Driving Innovation, the Impact of Diversity panel. So we're just about to go to lunch. I first and foremost want to make a couple of announcements. If anybody, if our team can do anything to make your experience a little bit better, we want everybody to be able to experience the conference as best as possible. So if anybody's not experiencing that, please do let my team know at registration. And as well, can we give a round of applause to our captioner, Wendy, who's remotely doing all the captioning, and she's been amazing. Thank you, Wendy.